The positive aging community brings together older adults, their loved ones, and professionals and volunteers who serve older adults. The professionals in our community have been essential to our growth and success over the last 32 years. On average, each professional in our community works with over 75 seniors and families per month, and they refer to over 21 different organizations and resources each month. These community members are very influential and resourceful. In addition, they distribute thousands of copies of Sourcebook and refer their connections to all of our digital platforms. Let's face it, understanding elder care and senior living options can be a challenge. The older adults and families who are part of our community are there to better understand their options and choices. Whether it be researching senior housing options, learning how to prepare their home for aging in place, or connecting with resources like aging life care managers or elder law attorneys, our community offers them objective guidance. Our older adult and family community members want to make connections as well. It might be connecting with other individuals who are in a similar situation, or making a connection to a provider in our trusted network of positive aging community champions. One of the best ways to see our community members engaged and in action is to join one of our live and interactive discussions. There's nothing better than experiencing older adults, family members, and professionals gathering together around a specific discussion topic, asking questions, sharing experiences, and helping each other. All right, folks, here we are at another live and interactive discussion brought to you by the Positive Aging community. And we got a real treat for you today. But I got a few housekeeping and a few special guests that I want to introduce you to before we jump on with our discussion with Bob Kramer. But the first thing is, especially for those that may have never been to one of these discussions before, these are live and interactive. And so you've got the opportunity to communicate with the other attendees in the discussion by using chat. You can communicate with everybody. Or if you have things that are specific to the folks on stage, feel free to use the Q&A button that you see down there at the bottom of your screen. In addition, if you really prefer to ask a question or participate verbally as opposed to by typing something in, you can always raise your little virtual hand and we'll open your mic and camera. And that's another thing for you to know. You can enjoy your lunch, and for fear of your camera and mic popping on suddenly, the only way that can happen is if you prompt us that you want to say something and we open up your mic. So with that, you're probably wondering who puts these together. It's the Positive Aging community. And we are able to give you these discussions and the Positive Aging Sourcebook thanks to the generous support of our Positive Aging community champions. These are organizations that support what we do. And a special treat today, before Bob Kramer comes on, you get to meet one of our champions, Phil Golden, who is with a community in the Baltimore area called Springwell. And Phil, I'm really psyched that you're on this discussion today because, and I've got you on stage is because as Bob is talking about the future of senior living, we've got a living, breathing provider who's really seen it all over the last few years, that you might be able to add some interesting insights to the discussion. But before we dive into that, let's get to know you and Springwell a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the community that you lead, Springwell.
Hey, Steve. Good afternoon. And it's great to be part of a panel with Bob Kramer. He was one of the first thought leaders I ever met when I got into the industry 34 years ago. That's starting to sound like a big number. With Meridian Healthcare as a financial analyst. They sold to Genesis in '94, and I joined up with Arnie Richmond to help him get Brightview Senior Living off the ground, which was a great experience. And after getting about 16 communities going at Brightview, I joined up with Springwell, which was a big turnaround of a once great community called the Wesley Home that my business partner, John Shea, purchased in 2008, and really kind of breathed life back into it with his vision of it being a great community, which offers independent living, assisted living, and memory care. Now we're an all rental community, as you mentioned, in Northwest Baltimore, in the beautiful neighborhood of Mount Washington, some of which you can see behind the older building there.
I've got that video there. That's great. And that's the historic building there that used to be called the Wesley. And when was that built, the historic part of the building?
So this campus has a history that dates back to 1931, when the Wesley was built by the Methodists in Baltimore. And it is kind of an interesting blend of old and new. We certainly got a lot of history there. In 2017, did something kind of innovative, partnering with a healthcare system in LifeBridge. And they helped us build the new building on campus, the Homestead Independent Living Building, which is home to over 100 independent living folks with state-of-the-art apartments and services, both care and hospitality. That's it right there in the.
See that right there. I love it. And man, I have not heard the name Meridian Healthcare in years. So it was that was an interesting walk down memory lane there. So Phil, this is awesome. I dropped in the website into chat. You're on stage, but feel free to duck behind the curtain anytime, and feel free to jump in with our discussion today with Bob if there's anything that kind of resonates with you. But before we get to Bob, we've got a couple of other guests, and we're going to refer to these folks as Ellen Squared. And this is Ellen Platt and Ellen Torres. And I know this might seem like the Maryland, cheerleader club today because everybody on stage is from Maryland, but we got a big event with the Alzheimer's Association of Maryland coming up, the gala. And but what I'm really excited about is that you guys have dialed into a wonderful format of Dancing with the Stars. And Ellen Platt, you're actually going to be dancing. Is that right?
I am going to be dancing this year, Steve. It's a great opportunity to raise money, funding for research and programming for the Alzheimer's Association. With the Option Group, I'm a geriatric care manager or aging life care manager, and we work with folks that have dementia all the time. We do support groups for the Alzheimer's Association, for caregivers, for people who have an early diagnosis, and for people who have young onset dementia. So we have those support groups here at our office. We look to them for resources and information for our clients, and we have a great relationship. So somebody twisted my arm and I have about 30 days to learn the rest of my routine and do a great showing for a good purpose.
I love it. And Ellen, you want to talk a little bit about this? And I can pull up the page here so folks can see where they can get more involved with this event.
So I was one of the arm twisters, and very happy to to do that. And other volunteers, including past dancing stars, also worked with us to convince Ellen that this was something that she could do and really get outside of your comfort zone. The Memory Ball Dancing Stars event is a unique and fun gala in Baltimore. We're known in town for being the most fun gala of all of the galas around. But what is really important about it is that people really do put everything on the line to get out on that dance floor. And so they take the time, the effort to learn the dancing, but they're also very important part of it is the fundraising. And so they are asking their friends and family, their corporate partners, people who they know to please support them in this effort. It's a tremendous fundraiser for the association, and it gives us an opportunity to reach new audiences that we might not reach in other avenues. And so $1, one vote. And so, as you can see from Ellen's page right there, she has amassed nearly 44,000 votes. Wow. And there are absolutely amazing mirror ball trophies that they are competing for, both in the dance and also in the fundraising. But mostly what it does is offers us the opportunity to provide our services here in Maryland and across the country. Our 800 number, our 24/7 helpline, which is available to answer any questions that people might have, from referrals and advice to somebody who said to me once, is there somebody on the other end of that phone who could just teach me not to cry every day? And so when you are dealing with caregiving duties, or you yourself are living with Alzheimer's or dementia diagnosis, there's a lot of emotion that is wrapped up in that. And there's a lot of practical advice and referring to places. So for instance, if somebody says, we don't feel safe having mom live in her home anymore, and we need to figure out what are the next options and what kind of care, we would be able to refer to organizations and to say, this is what this level of care means, this is what this level of care means, and where are you in the process? So those are the kinds of things that we do that really do help us.
I love it. Okay, and you're gonna I dropped some links into chat there. Hang out for a little bit. And folks, if you've got questions for Ellen Squared, throw them into chat or Q&A and they can respond if you've got questions. And Ellen, man, I can't believe how much money you've raised personally, but the fact that, this fundraising event is north of $600,000 now, that's absolutely amazing. It's a fun event and it's great, and a great way to celebrate our senior living community. So thanks a lot for that. Okay, I got a couple more housekeeping things, and then we're going to bring Bob on the stage. And the reason that I am bringing this up, and somebody dropped it into chat, they said, Steve, you haven't hit record yet. Well, I'll hit record here in a moment. And this afternoon, you'll be able to see the recording and a podcast version of this discussion. So that'll be over on the left-hand side of our website, where you can connect with champions, you can order source books. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see where we've got our schedule of upcoming discussions. And if you all aren't doing anything tomorrow at noon, jump in on our discussion with Glenna Crooks, because solo aging is our #1 topic. But we're going to be talking about how we can help people build their personal village to support them, whether they're a solo ager or not. And this is something that addresses affordability, loneliness and isolation, and a lot of other things. So hope that you jump in on those and any of these other discussions that we've got. So now I'm going to hit the record button. And I am really charged up about this discussion today, because if you're in the field of senior living, you know the name Bob Kramer. He is a true pioneer and thought leader in this segment. And he's not afraid to talk about, ways that we can get innovative and do a better job serving older adults of all incomes and abilities. And so without further ado, welcome, Bob. You've got a huge fan club because we got a lot of registrations for this discussion today.
Delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Steve, to join the show, and really looking forward to our discussion and the interaction with all the members of the community who are tuned in today.
I love it. And for those that might not be your fan club president, tell us a little bit about your background, and then let's sort of jump into what I hope is going to be a really thought-provoking discussion today.
Well, that's what we all want. I basically, again, Maryland ties and roots. I first got exposed to the whole area of aging and aging services as a freshman legislator in the Maryland legislature in 1983. And there was a troubled not-for-profit, what we called then CCRC, now Life Plan Community. And I was asked by the then Speaker, Ben Cardin, to serve on a task force because I was known as a consumer rights advocate. And to basically rewrite the state regs with regard for CCRCs. And I turned to my aide at the time and said, "What the heck's the CCRC?" I'd never heard the acronym in my life. That led to my learning an awful lot about CCRCs, but more broadly to seeing what became very clear to me was that as a country, we were completely unprepared for what was happening with the aging of our population. And secondly, that there was no way that the public sector by itself was going to solve the problem or fund the solutions, and that we were going to have to attract private sector capital. And that led through a series of relationships I developed, one in particular with a fellow, Tony Mullen, who really was an expert on with regard to the financing of housing and care for older adults. And we started NIC in 1991, basically to educate and attract capital to the senior housing and care field. And I led that organization. The whole thesis was to use data and transparency, similar to what investors had for other property types and other asset classes, to attract capital into the senior living space. We were very successful in that. And I led that organization until 2017, when I stepped into a board member and strategic advisor role in a planned transition. And then in 2020, 1 month into COVID, I launched a think tank called Nexus Insights. Our mission is to advance the well-being of older adults through innovative models of housing, community, and healthcare. And I have joined by a group of about a dozen of us as fellows. 2/3 are a generation younger than me, because I see them as the future thought leaders and leaders in our space as we innovate. So very involved still, both with NIC and very much with leading Nexus Insights, and basically speaking and engaging wherever I feel I have something to contribute, or our group at Nexus has something to contribute, and where we as NIC, because of the brand and the position we have, particularly connecting capital with providers of housing and care, where we can drive change.
Yeah, and I think what connected us here to put this discussion was some of the little projects, or I shouldn't say little, some of the important projects that you were involved with Nexus. I think it was a press release, and it may have been this one, the 7 ways to attract older frontline workers. You've really got some pioneering topics that you've explored with your new venture there, and that's really leads to our discussion today. When we were setting this up, Bob said, "Well, Steve, what do you want me to talk about?" And I was looking at all these headlines, and I was like, "Well, you could talk about this, you could talk about this." Well, we were scheduling this 3 months in advance, and I'm like, "Look, Bob, when you come on, let's just talk about what's on your mind, and folks that are in the audience, jump in with your thoughts and your questions, and we can steer this discussion anywhere we want to go." But with that, Bob, what's on your mind these days with this industry, if you want to call it that, of caring for older adults? What do we need to do? What should we be doing? What or should we stop doing?
Well, big questions. Let me try and take a few pieces. One, I think we're at a key sort of transitional moment. And part of that is we're moving from the previous customer, the greatest generation, and that really drove the last 30 years of growth in aging services, and particularly senior housing and care, to a new customer that will be the boomer. Now it's kind of the what so-called silent generation, but that thinks differently and is looking for something different. If I had to sum it up, I'd say in the past, senior living and aging services has been about what we do for and to older adults. In the future, it'll be about what is done by and with older adults. And that is a huge shift. I mean, we could spend our whole hour, Steve, just unpacking what that looks like, what that means. But the sort of what I'll call, frankly, at times condescending, patronizing, and also ageist view that older adults lack independent agency, lack the ability to continue to make a difference in the broader community, and to be change agents. I don't buy any of that, but most importantly, I think increasingly older adults are not willing to settle for whatever society provides for them as they live longer than anyone anticipated, but rather they want what I call purposeful longevity. They want not just to add years to their life, they want to add life and put life into their years. And they're looking for settings and services and programs and ways to engage that accomplishes that. Now, let me say one other thing in terms of this is even different from 3 months ago when we first talked about this show, Steve. And that is, I think we have to recognize that the entire field of aging services, and very specifically seniors housing and care as an industry, has gone through 3 shock waves over the last 3 years. Number one, COVID. Where you're just scrambling to keep your staff and your residents alive. It's all hands on deck, and you're trying to keep people alive. The number 2 crisis to hit us was the workforce crisis, and it's been building for a while. It didn't get caused by COVID, but it got highlighted and intensified because of COVID. So there's they're just simply trying to recruit and retain people in order that you could accept people referred to you, whether you're a home care agency, whether you're an assisted living provider, whether you're a skilled nursing provider. Demand is and will continue to far exceed supply, particularly of people. Because all in all, this is a high touch, not just high tech. Well, we haven't been high tech. We're becoming a little bit more. So, but then the third challenge was, on top of those first 2, you have people who are exhausted, from caregivers and dining room servers all the way through the C-suite. There's a mental and physical exhaustion. But then on top of that, you have the financial crisis. I don't mean just the capital markets upheaval, but inflation, interest rates rising, and now real capital market turmoil, where investors are very much on the sidelines and really concerned about preserving their capital. And in that situation, even when senior living providers have their occupancies improving, and their numbers in terms of their control of expenses and so forth improving, the uncertainty right now in the capital markets is presenting enormous challenges to the field right now. So you have these 3 things. You have COVID, you have the workforce, and you have what I'll call the capital markets turbulence right now. And so, but does that concern me? Yes. Does that make me throw up my hands in despair? Absolutely not. One of the things that I look for is in each of those, what's the silver lining that enables us in the crisis to emerge stronger and with a better product, with better service, and doing better with and for older adults. And I think that the very disruption that we're seeing now, and we're going to see. So what I'm saying is the next 12 to 24 months is not going to be a fun time in the senior housing and care field. I think there are going to be bankruptcies. There are going to be operators losing their buildings. I hope and trust there will be no residents losing their homes. But it's going to be a challenging time with a lot of headlines about companies in financial trouble. That said, I think there's going to be the opportunity for what I'll call the reset. What do I mean by that? Well, one of my desires, as you know, is to really see us think differently about the products and services and even the assumptions we make about our residents and those that we serve. And one of the key issues is, how do we serve people that can't afford our current products and services, at least for very long? And again, I mean, it's how long can you afford a minimum billing of 4 to 6 hours for home care when rates are now north of $30 an hour? Just as much as how long can you afford to live in an assisted living property? And so we have these financial challenges, but one of the things that I'm excited about is I think they're going to be buildings, they're going to get sold. And I don't know whether it'll be for 65 cents on the dollar or for 40 cents on the dollar. But what that means is the new owners are going to have what we call in financial terms a lower cost basis, which means they basically don't have as much money they've had to expend in buying the building. And that's going to be the opportunity to reposition these buildings to serve a market that, quite frankly, right now we're not serving.
I love it.
And that excites me. I think that combined with technology, combined with new ways of thinking about, I mean, again, silver lining, we were forced to come kicking and screaming into the 21st century world of digital during COVID. Whereas heretofore, healthcare, and even worse, senior care, was way behind. We were still in the 20th century of technology and digital. But suddenly, doctors' offices were closed and no one wanted to see their mom sent to an emergency room. And we suddenly discovered the ability to have telehealth, remote patient monitoring, synchronous and asynchronous healthcare delivered right into our residents' bedrooms and apartments. Similarly, we learned about other on-demand services. Well, that's going to be new ways of thinking about staffing to meet the needs of middle-income Americans who, for the most part, are increasingly getting priced out of, whether it's the option of staying at home with home care. You know, okay, 4 hours of home care at $32 an hour a day. And that assumes, I know you've got programs coming up on solo aging, that includes that, you know, you've got family members or others who are going to give unpaid care for you in the 20 hours a day that paid care worker is not there. So again, we've got a real challenge, but these very crises that we've encountered that I've ticked off are going to reset the playing field. And I'm excited about Nexus Insights. That name I developed because I believe that it's at the nexus point or intersection of differing perspective, differing industries, and differing perspectives in the time of crisis that real disruptive innovation occurs. And so that's what I feel like. I'm fortunate, I'm blessed. I've got a ringside seat now to this disruptive innovation. And that's what I want to be talking about and sharing with others.
Man, I love it, Bob. I mean, you're speaking my language, and I feel like I enjoy a ringside seat too. And we're ringside to some great questions and comments that are coming from folks. And you hit the nail on the head, because our first two sort of questions, comments came in related to affordability. Madhu says, how is senior housing affordable? How can people with limited income afford it? And Rick says, so much research focuses on what older adults will want. What about the many adults that will be able to afford these things in the future? And I know you addressed a lot of thoughts on there, but let's make sure that we stick a pin and continue this dialogue on different approaches to affordability, because it really is key out there. And I think
it's critical, and it's only gotten worse because of what's happened in the last several years. And so, you know, I coined a phrase, and we issued a study that we did with NORC, the research arm of the University of Chicago, called the Forgotten Middle. And we define this group as the group, and by the way, this is the fastest growing group of older adults 75 plus in the United States. And we define this group as they don't have enough in financial resources to afford most of today's senior living options, at least for very long. And I include in this home care. But they have too much in resources to qualify for government subsidy and support programs, Medicaid for long-term care, subsidized housing, low-income housing, tax credit housing, so forth. So they're stuck and they're somewhat forgotten. The private sector has focused on the folks that can afford their product, understandably, and the advocacy groups and government programs have focused on low income. But we know our original study showed that 14.5 million Americans 75 plus would be in this group by 2029. The update, which projected it to 2033, that number was well over 16 million, the largest single socioeconomic group. So again, whether we also have a ton of buildings of assisted living that were built from 1994 to 2008. They're 15 to 30 years of age right now. A lot of those buildings are not competitive in the high-end senior living market of today, but they definitely could be rethought and repurposed. Also, technology is available today that wasn't available before to rethink food service and food delivery and rethink care. But for instance, as in one model now being developed in Boston, where they're doing a preferred home care provider, but that home care provider has to commit to bill in 30-minute and 1-hour increments. That's key, because many older adults, they don't start out needing 4 hours of care, but they have to pay for 4 hours of home care. And that breaks the budget in no time. So ways to think about this. I also would say a couple of strong themes here that I think are critical. I mentioned this idea of doing with and by rather than to and for. That's critical, because part of the future of communities, and many of these will be intergenerational. They won't just be age limited or age restricted, but many communities of the future, they'll be, in a sense, it'll be going back to the old affinity group notion of CCRCs, but they're people who have shared passions, shared interests, and thus want to live together. But they're defined by what they want to do and what they want to accomplish, not by their physical or cognitive limitations. And, you know, we're really good as an industry, Steve, at asking, they're important questions. You know, what kind of assistance do you need with activities of daily living? How many chronic conditions do you have? How many over-the-counter and prescription drugs do you take? And oh yes, the critical question, what's your financial situation and how long can you afford our product? But no one, I don't know anyone who sees their identity wrapped up in the answers to those questions.
Absolutely.
We don't ask the most important questions, which are, you know, what if you're engaging with us or you're moving into our community, what do you bring that you want to contribute to this community? What are your life goals? What do you want to accomplish in the next month, the next year? What things would you like to learn? What things would you like to accomplish? What relationships really matter to you? How would you like to grow and be stretched? So as I've written about, I think we're going to see all sorts of themes in these communities, which, by the way, some will be will be intergenerational 24 hours a day. Some will be intergenerational 12 hours a day. But the sense of you're old, we're going to care for you, so we're going to park you off in a building that no one visits other than grandchildren and faith-based organizations on the weekend. That ain't going to cut it, folks. That's what one boomer described to me. That's not senior living, that's senior dying. That's last stage living. And I want to do everything I can to avoid that. So we have to create settings that are aspirational. It doesn't mean we aspire to lose cognitive functioning or we aspire to lose mobility. But in those situations, we still have a sense of purpose and engagement and things we aspire to. And these communities need to be built around that. So I've talked about, communities. I described one as Changeville, and that's about social change and communities that will attract people around the theme of social change, which goes back to boomers and protests in the 60s and 70s. Another is Serviceville, the whole focus on volunteerism. I think one of the keys in the middle market is building a sense of ownership of the community by the residents. So they take on things, they do the programming. And it's not this, what my fellow at Nexus, Dr. Bill Thomas, describes as learned helplessness. We got to get away from that. Learned helplessness is deadly. We know now from the research, Becca Levy, her book, Breaking the Age Code, others, we know that learned helplessness not only shortens your lifespan, but it also means the quality of your health span is reduced as well. So these are some of the things that I see that are just exciting opportunities. Bear in mind, I just don't want to discount from frontline workers to executives. Our field has just been traumatized in the last 3 years. And there's a lot of exhaustion, a lot of PTSD. But at the same time, what I'm excited about is this creates the opportunity to have a reset. I'll make one other point, and then you can maybe pick up on some of the other questions because I see some great questions coming in on the chat. But one other reset. Prior to COVID, we treated our hourly frontline employees, people during COVID, we started terming essential workers and essential employees. We treated them basically as widgets. It was a transactional relationship. And it was, I have the following tasks. They must be accomplished in your 8-hour or 12-hour shift. And that's all I care about. And I don't care about, I have no interest in your life and what you bring when you come in the morning, if that's a daytime shift, and what you're going home to in the evening. COVID disrupted that. Why? Because in order to do infection control and prevention, we suddenly had to care. We suddenly had to care about how did our frontline workers access food. We had to care about their kids who weren't getting breakfasts and lunches at school anymore because the schools were closed. And we had to care about all these issues. And it gave the opportunity, good operators who have good retention are operators that have relationships based on empathy and understanding of their hourly employees, where they're coming alongside those employees, not to solve the problems, but to show they care and be part of the solution. If you view your shift workers as transactional employees, you're always going to have a high turnover rate. But if instead you invest in them and in their lives and say, one example that I often use in the greater DC area is Goodwin Living.
Yep, Goodwin. I was just going to say, yeah.
Yeah, and one conversation between a resident and a dining room server who had been there for a long time and was always upbeat, and that day was downcast, and the resident asking him why, and his saying, well, I'm so discouraged. They keep raising the fees for me to take the citizenship exam, and they keep making it harder. And I just don't think I'm ever going to get there. Well, that resident talked to other residents, talked to the administration. Today, 149 immigrants 149 are either have received their citizenship or on a path to getting U.S. citizenship because of programs led by the residents at Goodwin Living. You want to talk about creating a bond between residents and staff? You want to talk about creating something that's attractive to staff to want to stay there and gives the residents a sense of purpose? They raise the money, $10,000 a pop. That's 149 times $10,000. That's not inexpensive. And they set up the tutoring, working with the administration to be able to enable staff to have the time. So there are many other examples like this, but we have to start viewing residents and older adults as problem solvers, not problems. We will not address the issues of the future of an aging society if we just see them as problems to be solved.
And this is great. And you're right, we got tons of questions. And one of the things sort of reflecting on what you're talking about, Goodwin Living, and talking about, there's communities that are now investing in sustainability and recycling and solar panels. And what I'd like everybody to think about, imagine, okay, a lot of people in our industry think that coffee shops and diners and, and a fancy lobby is what's going to attract somebody to this community. But my challenge is, if somebody finds out that they've got this immigration program at Goodwin Living and that is in alignment with their ideals, they're going to move in and they could care less the square footage of their apartment and that it doesn't have granite countertops. Is that you're part of a movement and you're making an impact, and that's really what's important. And I think for the future,
I would state what you just said, Steve, as community trumps amenities.
Absolutely. Yep.
And ultimately, we know that Lisa Marsh Ryerson, who at the time was the president of the AARP Foundation, gave a NIC Talks, which is a series of talks available on the NIC website that I curate. They're basically TED Talks, but specifically on the issue of aging. And Lisa, in her talk, this was like 5-6 years ago, she challenged senior living providers and said, I challenge you to rethink and redo the role of your activities directors. They should be purpose matchmakers, or as Bill Thomas puts it, difference makers. The role of that activities director is not to have pass the time bingo games, passing the time while you decline. Rather, it's connecting or reconnecting you with what gives you a sense of purpose. What the Japanese have an expression, ikigai. And it literally translates to reason to get up for breakfast. Or another way of translating it is just what gives you your sense of purpose. And the sense of purpose may be as simple as being able to communicate and being able to participate in and finally see my grandson graduate from college. And that gives me a sense of purpose. Or it may be as simple as you said, I want to live in a community that is really conscious of its ecological footprint and is sustainable from its food to its waste and to everything it does. I visited my sister who lives in such a community up in Vermont, and they don't cut their grasses. Well, as somebody who at this time of year, but also then in August when ragweed comes around, I visited my sister and my allergies went haywire. But this is a community where more than 60% of the residents come from out of state. To your point, Steve, what are they attracted by? They want to be part of a community that's really committed to really studying and improving their ecological footprint and as part of a larger movement with regard to concerns about global warming and how we leave the planet that we've inherited. So whether the issues are DE&I and belonging, whether the issues are global warming or whether they're local. One of the issues that I am really excited by a number of life plan communities I see in particular is one of the greatest challenges, and again, government isn't going to fix this, unfortunately. The average low income and middle income child has lost 2 to 3 years of education in the most formative years between 5 and 12, years that the social cost of never getting that back is going to be huge for years in our society. Well, I would love to see an army of teachers and professors, many of whom live because they're planners in life plan communities, being an army of tutors. And there are places doing this sort of thing, Ingleside, again, in the DC area. But, this is doable. We have a volunteer corps available, living in so many of our communities and engaged in living out in the broader community in their apartments and homes, who would love to feel like they're making a difference in someone's life. We've got to not park our seniors in a place of last resort. We've got to engage our seniors in improving our society. And, I think that's just a huge opportunity. And by the way, just to answer quickly, the community I talked about my sister lives in is Wake Robin. It's a very Vermonty life plan community outside Burlington, Vermont.
Wake Robin. Okay, cool. I will pull that up. Okay, let's dive into Jim's question, because he'd like us to address aging in place as a solution, because, even if we built senior living communities, we can still only handle a very small defined percent of the population. And so your thoughts on this term aging in place and how that fits into things?
Well, I think the term aging in place is dangerous, because aging in place without a plan almost always ends badly. Aging in place with a plan can be very different, but the plan has to be realistic. Having a plan at age 65 that assumes that the friends that are in your neighborhood are going to continue to be in that neighborhood, assumes you will still have the mobility and the ability to drive that you have. That's not a realistic plan. And so I think the issue, one of my fellows, again, at Nexus, Ryan Frederick, has written a terrific book called Right Place, Right Time. And he's been amazed by the consumer reaction. Now he's developed some great interactive consumer guides. You can go to his website, here.life. Again, Ryan Frederick, you can get all this information through Nexus Insights website as well. But it's basically a series of questions. It's really a guide for the sorts of questions you need to be asking as you think about, as he puts it, housing for the second half of your life. Because many people, when they're in their 50s, many are going to live for 30 and 40 years. And one of the statements I would make is that as a society, our economy, our social expectations, our social insurance programs are all still built for people to retire and die in their 60s and 70s. And we haven't woken up to the reality that that's not the case for everyone anymore. And increasingly, people are living much longer. Susan Goldman's written a great book, Stage Not Age. And Stanford Center on Longevity's put out a report they call the map for the 100-year life. And this has huge implications. When I talk to my grandchildren today, I don't talk about one career. I talk about the fact of the careers they will have in the future. But coming back to this issue of affordability, I want us and aging in place. Many people will try and stay as long as they can wherever it is they're presently living. And I'm not opposed to that, but they've got to have a plan for that. And it's got to be realistic. Moving into a new apartment and not looking to see, how wide are the door frames? Are there grab bars? Or if there aren't grab bars, is there reinforcing so that if I had to put in grab bars, It would be really easy and inexpensive to do. But I think more importantly, Ryan's done a terrific job of pointing out that one of the keys to healthy longevity is place. And so what I would encourage people to do, and Ryan goes into this much more detail, is think about what gives you a sense of purpose. What relationships matter to you? What activities matter to you? What groups matter to you? And think about how in the future those may be affected if you are no longer able to drive, if you start to lose mobility. How would you be able to continue to maintain and enhance those relationships, to stay engaged in those activities? Those are the questions one needs to ask. And again, the belief, and this is where I say aging in place is dangerous. It's dangerous, one, because people think, oh, I'll just stay here, therefore I don't need a plan. Actually, if you're going to stay here, you need a plan much more seriously than if your plan is to move into senior living, because they've actually thought about those issues for you. But if you're just going to stay in place, and so key about that is you really need a plan. It needs to be realistic. The other thing that worries me about it, I was a legislator during the time in the 80s when we were focused on moving folks in mental health institutions out into the community and no longer warehousing them and institutionalizing them. And it was absolutely true. There were many people basically abandoned in mental health hospitals that didn't need to be there. But what I saw was the policy officials, elected officials, said, gee, this is great. We can give people what they want, move everyone into the community. But then everyone in Maryland, the Democrats said, we'll put all that money into education. The Republicans said, we'll put all that money into cutting taxes. No one listened to the advocates that said the money must follow the person into the community, and the money didn't. And so rather than solve problems, we created problems. And ultimately, people were able to, okay, we underfund deliberately nursing home care because we say, well, we want to give everyone what they want. All these AARP polls say everyone wants to stay in place. But of course, they ask the questions the wrong way. The right way to ask the question is, should you lose your mobility? Should you have cognitive challenges? When AARP asked a question that way, 42% said they'd want to move to a place that could accommodate their needs. That's a totally different answer than every year saying that overwhelmingly 85 and 90% of the people want to stay in place. Sure, you just fast forward your present situation to the future and say, I want to keep it up. But that's not reality. Bill Thomas, again, to quote him, I love my fellows. They're all smarter than I am. And Bill likes to say, as we get older, we fall more in love with our home. Unfortunately, our home doesn't love us back.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Okay. There's some.
Let me say one other thing on that. I'm not speaking against aging in place. We need all of the solutions. We need to scale every type of solution. We need for people to stay at home safely longer, partly for financial reasons. We need more communities. We also need more intergenerational and multi-generational communities, and not just age-restricted communities. So it's not either or. The needs are so great. The solution is both and, not either or.
I love it. Okay. I'm number one, it's 10 minutes to the top of the hour. Bob, you can hang on a little bit longer because we got lots of questions and comments that we can keep this discussion going. And everybody, this is recorded. So if you need to jump off, it'll be up later today in recording and podcast format for you to jump back on or share it. But this comment from Renee really caught my attention because this is something that I'm really passionate about. She says, I live in a large, diverse apartment building where there's many seniors. With whom can we discuss how to organize ourselves to serve our aging selves and others, such as tutoring children, action for climate, helping others. Before you answer this, Bob, I want to throw out this panel that I was on with a low income. It was a resident of a low income senior living building, and the resident was complaining because people have dementia in her building, and at night they knock on doors and they make noises and things like that. And as me and the other panel members were thinking about this and brainstorming solutions for her, exactly what Renee is bringing up was my solution, is that, look, in this low income building, you don't have the money to leave and go to a memory care community. And how do you know that you're not going to be one of those people that is wandering the halls because you develop a cognitive impairment? It's paramount that, Renee, that you and your neighbors come together and organize to take care of yourselves. And who do you go to start to do that? You can email me. I'll be your biggest cheerleader. I'll help you rally the troops. But honestly, just find 3 other people and start having conversations. You can activate yourselves. You don't need a management company, because remember what Bob said in the beginning? This is not other people serving you. This is you serving yourself. And when we rally communities like that, they're going to be attractive places to live.
Well said, Steve. I think that again, and specifically in examples like that, trying to look at programs, PACE would be an example. I'm really excited. I'm going next Tuesday to the formal opening of a PACE program in Anacostia. Again, Ward 7, Ward 8 of DC, an area usually neglected, usually always gets the short end of the stick in terms of services and investment. And that's an exciting program. And again, that's a program that engages low income, dual eligible elders. And similarly, there's in West Baltimore, Mondavin Mall. That's going to be the site of a PACE program in West Baltimore. And with the new governor's commitment to the West Baltimore area, I'm really excited about this. Another community that often has been neglected. And so, I hate the phrase adult daycare, but for instance, there are some innovative, progressive programs to engage folks with cognitive loss. And we know that if you don't engage them during the day, they're more likely to wander. And there are lots of reasons that people then become wanderers and they can't sleep at night. And so, again, looking for opportunities, I think one of the keys, and I'm involved in a number of discussions, is how do we take a PACE program and extend it what I call the lower half of the forgotten middle? People who eventually are going to end up spending down to Medicaid. And in today's world, they're going to spend down. By the time they spend down, they're going to be sicker, frailer, and more likely to need very expensive health care. So one of the problems here is we have a funding stream that's federal, primarily Medicare, and state Medicaid. And so, each doesn't always care about the dollars the other funding source is saving. But, I do want to just point out, I want to give a shout out to Louis Tannenbaum of Homes Renewed. Certainly when it comes to, if you want to have a real plan to age in place in terms of your physical structure, Lewis's organization is terrific and provides terrific help and services. But I want to point out, aging in place is not as simple as your physical structure. Ultimately, as we've said earlier, it's relationships that matter. So yes, we want to keep you from being at risk of falling, but we also want to figure out ways to keep you engaged and with the relationships that make the biggest difference in your life.
So when you were talking about the PACE program supporting the middle income, Leslie was typing in the restrictions on the PACE program, and it's tying to Medicaid. And right when you said that, she's like, yes. And then she says, but that requires legislative action. And that also stems into Rick, who says, how about working to convince federal state governments to help the middle income market It may be reimbursing communities. So Bob, you started your career in policy. What can we expect to get out of policy changes? Because the numbers are so huge, and COVID, you know, this country is not necessarily financially solvent.
Yeah. No, I mean, let me say, we're going to have a lot of tough choices in the future. And I'll be very blunt. I'm really concerned about utilitarian thinking. And utilitarian thinking will leave older adults to fend for themselves, which will mean the gap between the poor and the well-off will only accentuate. And that said, I love the piece. Chris Richmond, a Washington Post reporter, recently did a piece several weeks ago about the forgotten middle and this challenge. And he had a great quote in there from a woman. He had profiled she and her husband, who I believe had dementia, and they were basically going through all their savings and still not being able to access the care that he needed. And she was exhausted and burnt out. And she made the comment, which I thought was powerful. She said, "We have done everything our country told us to do." So again, I think this is critical to get at policymakers. These are not people that you just dismiss as the perpetually poor or that you say have been irresponsible. The whole point of the human face Chris put on this issue, and there's also been a lengthy article in the New York Times on the same theme. But in putting a human face, he pointed out these are people with whether with 401ks and they've done all the things they thought they needed to do to have a safe and secure retirement and time of getting old. And instead, it's quite the opposite. And they in a sense feel betrayed. But that said, I think, you know, the very fact, I mean, we did this study, I call this my capstone project, the Forgotten Middle Study, because, you know, NIC had gotten the attention of capital, and capital had gotten comfortable with seniors housing, but it was private pay for upper middle class and upper class. The forgotten middle was to shine this spotlight on this huge population. And again, in a society like ours, okay, we want to stimulate private sector capital to come up with solutions. We got this large, completely underserved population. How are we going to serve them? It'll be by a combination of policy and private sector initiative. You know, I'd love to see $1 billion and $2 billion. We have workforce housing funds now. Well, what we're talking about with the forgotten middle when it comes to senior housing is basically the same population when they're 75. It's those that have worked in public safety. It's teachers. It's nurses, and this same group. And if you think about it, all the state pension funds, teachers funds, state employee funds, they're managing the retirement savings of the forgotten middle. So we want to, I mean, the first step with any problem is you got to admit it. And we've been in denial as a country. And then secondly, once you admit it and face it, and I think articles like in the Post and the New York Times are helping, and again, they all quote our study, then you can begin to say, well, what are solutions? I mean, looking at a lot of things, as clearly some of the our audience realizes right now, many seniors, even if they want to buy in to the program, they have to buy in at the Medicaid rate, which for them, since they're not eligible, you know, that's going to be prohibitively expensive, like $3,000. Well, they don't have that money. And then secondly, they've got to give up their Part D coverage and get not nearly as good a coverage of their prescription drugs through the Medicaid program. Those are things we're going to have to address, but we won't address them unless we see that, you know, we got a train that's about to go off the tracks. I described the challenges of our aging population as it's like a game of musical chairs. And if you're a politician, you don't want to be in office when the music stops. And we're getting closer and closer to that time, but we're not going to solve it just with government dollars. We need the private sector. Monday this week, I went to the graduation ceremony, so to speak, for the next class of tech stars in aging, sponsored by the Melinda Gates's Pivotal Ventures. And this was the first time they've been able to meet in person. And it's exciting to see the technology innovations that are going to enable people to live safely, independently longer. And most importantly, to live with dignity with their entire lives. And so I'm not discouraged, but at the same time, some of the comments that, the country doesn't have unlimited resources. I'm really concerned. Let me say this. If we don't change the narrative about aging and getting older, a utilitarian scenario will kick in, and it'll be basically kind of follow the thinking of Zeke Emanuel, who wrote an article in The Atlantic in 2014, Why I Hope to Die at 75. And in it, he basically said, he was 57 at the time, that he believed when he got to 75, he would move to on the negative side of the scale in terms of his contribution to society, that he was more of a burden to his family and society than he was a plus. And therefore, he hoped to die at 75. Now, Zeke recently turned, his brother is Ram, recently turned 65, and many people opined, wonder if he's going to soon push 75 back to 85. But understand, if we view elders as a net drain on society, two things happen. One, you take a utilitarian point of view, which doesn't end well. But two, you actually are dooming society. Why? Because throughout history, our demography has been a pyramid. Largest number of young folks at the bottom, a few old folks at the top. By 2030, our demographics will be a cylinder. As many people, in fact, more over 65 as under 18. China in 2050 will be an inverted pyramid, and they're scared to death by it. So by saying that we're going to take this attitude towards old people, I'll quote Ashton Applewhite, one of our Nick Talk speakers. That's prejudice against our future selves. And when I speak at universities and colleges now, I ask people why they're taking this course in whatever it is, in aging or aging services or seniors housing. And then I point out to them, I say, those of you in this classroom have more at stake in this issue than I do. I'm soon going to be 75, and it's too late to change many of social attitudes and expectations. But I said, you're more likely than I am to live to 100. And because you're in this college or even grad school program, your chances of living beyond 100 are better than 50-50. And the only group that has more stake in changing this is the generation coming after you, your children. You're more likely to live to 100. And today, we consign you to social, economic, and life irrelevance in the last third of your life. No one wants to live that way. And our society for the future, at least for the next couple of 100 years, we've got to learn how to appropriate the contributions economically, socially, on social issues and so forth of our older adults. If not, we're basically condemning our society to extinction over time.
Man, such great thoughts. And Bob, I just don't want to interrupt you. I love it when you go off on these topics, and our community members love it too. Okay. But let's kind of, because we're bumping up on where we probably got to book you for another discussion, but because of your role with NIC, and you've got sort of this handle on where the money is and where people are willing to invest, there's a couple of discussions that were brought up by Sakina in terms of, building communities that are outpriced. But then, one of Lillian threw it on there. It's like, what about building tiny homes? But I also want to address the issue that one of the trends that I've seen in the developers is a shift away from supportive housing, where you've got healthcare and workers, to the active adult, where it's like, hey, we can just throw up a building, put some amenities in, have a concierge, and make more of a profit. What are your kind of thoughts on what can we do to address that middle market that folks are talking about?
Well, I think one of the things is to realize, Steve, that we've got there are three pieces, and then there's the key to weaving them together. One piece is the housing, the physical structure, and our understanding of social determinants and health. Now we say things like housing is health. We never said that 10 years ago. Second thing is, though, the supportive services, that they're available on demand, that you don't have to pay for them up front, whether you need them or not, but that they're there as you need them. And then the third thing is what I call wraparound preventative well care that involves management of chronic conditions in a proactive way to basically avoid the acute care flare-ups. And so you've got to accomplish all three of those three things. But the glue that's the key to that is building community, is building engagement in the community. Without that, you just continue the learned helplessness. Without that, you're not really engaging the residents, be they residents in a building built for older adults, or be they residents that are gathering together at a community center that come from all over a part of a city. That's, we can't. So I'm not going to fault those that are, first of all, just doing housing, but the issue is, how do we build these wraparound services? I'm encouraged that many folks now in the middle market, I'll cite United Church Homes as one example. They, even though in the HUD program and in the subsidized housing, you've got a paid position for that service coordinator that coordinates with all those outside services as folks need things. But United Church Homes, in their middle market model, they build that service coordinator role because they see them as key, even though it's not funded through any sort of grant program or whatever. But they believe that that's absolutely essential. And so, as I said, there are a lot of discussions going on now about how to build wraparound healthcare services. Hopefully, we're going to see, as we look at supplemental non-directly healthcare benefits through MA plans, we're going to see those plans realize that investing in these services is good business, as well as good health. So these are all critical things. I do want to say too, just we can't answer all of them, but just I see some discussion that's gone on in the chat about sort of mixed age communities and having college students and so forth be vetted but live in so-called seniors housing. There are examples of that in the U.S. Tabitha in Nebraska is doing that. They have a program for nursing students where they are opening up a building where about a quarter of the residents are nursing students, and they have an engagement in that community of older adults. There's another, I'm just blanking on the name now. It might be Harker, but there are several companies developing these models now in the U.S. But I do want to say one thing. It reinforces my point that this is a joint public-private sector effort. You need the innovation, the ingenuity, and the private sector funding. When I first got into this field in the 80s and 90s, I toured, I met my wife in Stockholm. We have great affinity to Scandinavia, and obviously they do some incredible programs there. That said, in the 80s and 90s, when I visited European programs, they were almost kind of, we feel sorry for you, because we don't need a private sector, because we provide everything through our government programs, except for the super wealthy. The interesting thing is now I get invited almost every week to come help those countries who now realize their social insurance programs are too generous. They can't afford them anymore. Look at the current riots that have gone on in France about just raising the retirement age 2 years. So, and they now realize, rather than seeing it as only the uber wealthy that might need private services, they are desperately actually now trying to catch up with the US, ironically, because they need a vital private sector to serve the middle market, because their programs aren't going to be able to be there to the extent they used to be there for that group. And they are really worried about that. So
Yeah, and
I've been
it's
in this sector
interesting.
long enough. I took a tour 85 to 87. I took another one in the 90s. And to me, the contrast has just been remarkable. And yes, Rick, Illinois has a great program, but that program was so popular that they put a cap on it. And then on top of that, they stopped doing the increases to keep up with market costs. And so people were forced to bail out of the program that were in it. So great model, the SLIP program in Illinois. There are other states that are aggressively making use of Medicaid waivers. North Carolina would be an example. Oregon would be another. Ohio's doing some really experimental things with that. But anyway, I just wanted to catch a few of these. So such great discussion in the chat, and I didn't want to, and I want to say hello to all the friends and colleagues that I see in the chat, and I'm just trying to have a quick eye to respond to a couple of things I see there.
I love it. And yeah, I think you've got a big fan club, but we've hopefully grown that for you today. This is an absolutely amazing discussion. And I mean, we literally could keep on going for hours. I'm going to get on your calendar and we're going to get you back here, Bob. Thank you for your time. But I always say what really makes these discussions are you all, bantering amongst yourselves and throwing topics to our panel members. And Phil, I gave a shout out. You talk about a great intergenerational program. The Peabody Institute has music students living in Springwell, where Phil is.
Hey, Bob. Once and always a thought provoker, and I loved hearing the discussion. And you continue to encourage guys like me to stretch further and try new ideas. So thank you. It's great seeing you.
Good to see you again, Phil, and excited with what you're doing now and look forward to learning more about it. So yeah, absolutely. Let's continue the discussion.
You've armed me with some good ideas. I think a nursing student in residence is next on my list. I like that one a lot. But
well, it meets a lot of needs right now. And let me say that providing them with low cost or inexpensive housing, and then potentially also looking into helping them with loan repayment in return for coming to work for you. There's so many different things that can be done with models like this today.
I love it. Thanks for doing what you do, both of you.
All right. This is awesome. All right, Bob, we're going to get you back on, and you've really left us with a lot of inspiration and things to think about. And folks, email me if there's anything that resonated in today's discussion that you want us to dive deeper into. Let's use this conversation as a starting point. I also want to encourage you to jump in on our Building Your Own Personal Village discussion tomorrow, because that solves a lot of the problems and takes ownership of it on your own while we're waiting for the shift to change. And Bob, any last things that you want to leave us with, or are you good to go?
No, I've enjoyed the time. I know we've gone over. Appreciate everyone hanging around. The key, obviously, though, is the energy of this conversation and of all the engagement on the chat. We've got to focus that and strategically. And again, it's not an either or in terms of solutions, both public, private sector, for-profit, not-for-profit. We kind of need all the ideas, and we need to marshal them. And you know, we have a daunting task in front of us, but it's a critical, it's also an enormous opportunity. I mean, I like to say, you know, what's the future of senior living? Well, it won't be called senior living because that's basically for boomers, their parents' notion. But, you know, we have to create something that's aspirational. And I believe that the dislocations and disruptions caused by the events of the last 3 years and what I believe is also going to be the next year to two are going to present enormous opportunities to have new models and new ways of thinking about, because ultimately what we're doing, and I'll close on this note, what we have to do, Steve, is we have to change the expectations of and for aging and getting older. And when we change the expectations, then we will begin to actually change the lived experience, because that's the key. The key is to change the quality of life, the lived experience of older adults. But we have to realize, all of us, myself included, I've had great people over the last 40 years that have, where I've used a phrase and they pointed out to me, you know, Bob, that's really kind of an ageist assumption in that phrase. I remember being confronted by somebody when I had the phrase silver tsunami in a slide deck, and this woman confronted me and said, that's an unbelievably negative ageist statement. Nothing good comes out of a tsunami. And I said, thank you. You're absolutely right. So anyway, thanks for the time. Great to be with you, Steve.
I love it. Talk to you all soon.